This week on The Futurists, Avi Bar Zeev.
We tend to overestimate what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years and think everything is going to get solved, but then underestimate that in 10 years, things are way beyond what we ever expected.
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tercek, and I am here this week by myself. My colleague Brett King is flying back to Dubai because he just loves going back there, and we're building a business together there. In the meantime, I'm thrilled to turn the attention away from that event in Dubai to a subject that's long been a matter of interest for me and many of the listeners on this show, which is this space called many different topics. Sometimes it's referred to as augmented reality or extended reality or mixed reality. Sometimes it's called immersive media. Sometimes it's called the metaverse. And sometimes it's called spatial computing. I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, who is someone who has deep experience in every aspect of this emerging medium. It's Avi Bar Zeev. And Avi has been working at the forefront of these technologies for about 30 years. He's worked on just about every project you can imagine, from Microsoft, companies like Apple, Amazon, Second Life, and many others. Well, Avi, instead of me doing the intro, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've done? Welcome to the Futurists.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So what do you call yourself? Like, how do you introduce yourself to people?
I don't know. I mean, you could say creative technologist, storyteller, thinker. I tend not to use the terms like futurist or visionary or things like that, because I think those sometimes apply to people who are more in the selling of ideas, sort of the sales side, or the marketing or the evangelism. And I'm not really. I do a little evangelism, but I'm really focused on figuring out the future. Mm-hmm. And explorer might even be the better term, because I think what I do for a living is I find a new space, kind of like mappers would find an area that they hadn't been to before, and map it out, figure out what's good, figure out what's bad, figure out where the holes are and where the mountains are, and try to report back as a scout to go ahead and find the future before other people get there.
And one through line on your work as a creative technologist is that you've always been focused on dimensionality, 3 dimensions, the ability to represent a space or a world or a scene in multiple dimensions with computers. And that is kind of a through line of all those different technology terms I used to introduce you a moment ago. Tell me a little bit about the concept of spatial computing, because that seems to be the through line there.
Yeah, that's a term that's actually been around a really, really long time. So I think it originated.
People think that was a term that Apple coined when they launched the Vision Pro headset.
I'm so glad that Apple used the term, that they picked it. I don't know that they had anything to do with that, but I had been using it 30 years ago. Even though I worked at Apple, I don't know that I ever mentioned it there. But it's a really good choice, and the reason is that it started relating to geographical information systems in the 80s. It was this key idea of, let's make a digital version of the world that we can have computers understand, so that computers can do work for us and help us understand the world better and help us figure things out about the world better. So if you were going to put a building somewhere, you could figure out what is that building where's it going to cast a shadow? How is it going to sound? How does it change the city skyline? Or even if it's just a house, how does it affect the neighbors? You could figure that all out if you've digitized it and are able to run algorithms over that data. And so that's where spatial computing started. And in 1992, I was in a very small startup that lasted a year or two. We used the term because we were trying to apply those ideas to virtual reality, right? So the term virtual reality had been coined a long time ago as well. And it was being applied now to goggles and immersion, and we were very interested in combining those two ideas. And so we had called it spatial computing, but the company didn't survive. I think for me, the best thing that came out of that company was that I got to do some cool demos, which got me noticed by Disney, and I wound up getting a really good job at Disney that I never would have known about had I not done those demos. And the demos never panned out to anything else, but they were really good learning experience. And Disney wound up being my first sort of paying job that we did something pretty amazing, which was spend a lot of money, in this case, to build VR for consumers and for entertainment. And, the key idea was, we're building a time machine. We're building something that other people can't do for another 5, 10, even 15 years. and the power that we had was the equivalent of maybe an Xbox, right?
Mm.
But it cost $1 million back in 1992, 93. But we were able to try things that other people couldn't afford to try, and build these experiences that I still have people who come up to me today at conferences saying that Disney Aladdin ride that you worked on was the first thing I ever saw that was VR, and it got me into the field. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, me too. Like
Yeah.
that was pretty profound, and I learned so much just from doing that. It's sustained my career for the next 10 years of just being able to help other people build really cool things, even after I left Disney.
That's a really good way to put it. I think sometimes when you're working at the coal face, of a new technology, grinding it out, you lose a little perspective because it's so difficult, right? We need better processors, better displays, better headsets, better connectivity, and you're limited by those factors. Even though in your mind you've got a very clear vision of what you're trying to achieve and what you want to convey to other people, but it's hard to execute because of all those really generally physical and technology limitations. And so it can be a little demoralizing because you're, down in the tunnel, digging out a coal mine. And it's really encouraging when you hear from people who say, hey, I saw that work. I noticed it. It inspired me and it led us to this other thing. Come join us. We're working on a cool thing together. Now, you've had that opportunity many times with Microsoft. You created really one of the most profoundly successful advances in immersive media with the holodeck. And to this day, people will say to me that was the most effective for industrial metaverse. That's still the thing they prefer to build for. You also worked on Second Life, which I think maybe some of our listeners don't realize is still going strong. Like 25 years later, there's still millions of people that use Second Life, the real first 3D social experience, the metaverse, way before Mark Zuckerberg heard of it or had even launched Facebook. You also created Keyhole. Now, Keyhole, tell people what Keyhole is, because I think that one may elude some of our listeners. But I think Keyhole was a pretty significant milestone.
Yeah, they may have heard of it from the name it got after it was acquired by Google. It became Google Earth. So it was originally called, the company was called Keyhole. The product was called Earth Viewer. We wanted it, but the name we really wanted, remember, this was at the height of the dot-com boom. So we really wanted Earth.com. We were going to be Earth.com, and that was going to be our big, IPO, was to be the IPO of Earth.com. And it would be everything, all the data about the Earth in one place. And you could go there and you'd know if you needed maps, if you needed the spatial computing idea, the GIS, it would all be found through this kind of, to use internet terminology, portal that leads you to the good information. So it got acquired. The company, I thought, was a really great idea for a company. I was one of the founders, but the CEO was John Hankey, who went on to lead Google Geo, and then founded Niantic, which did
Yeah.
Pokemon Go, and they've done some really really cool stuff over in San Francisco with Niantic,
Also
a few other people.
geographic based, right? So that's been a part
Exactly,
of his career. Oh, that I
exactly.
didn't get that connection, but that's really quite useful. Now, how did you go about doing that? Because at the time, a lot of people thought that would be an impossible thing to do, like to build a representation of the entire planet. So at the time,
Yeah.
what technologies did you use and what data did you have?
There's a couple of things that came together. One was on the data side. Al Gore deserves a lot of credit for this. He gets a lot of ribbing for people saying he claimed he invented the internet. And, he didn't actually say that, but he did help fund it. He did actually, as a congressman, he provided a lot of funding.
Yeah.
One of the other initiatives that he funded was this thing called the Digital Earth Initiative, which got all the satellite companies, at least the ones that the U.S. had influence over, which is most of them. He got them to start publishing their data in a way that we could consume it. So it had previously been a pipeline only to the intelligence services, and very expensive. And he said this. He had this vision that this data will be profound for climate science, for everything else we need to do. So he got Congress to basically fund this initiative, Digital Earth Initiative. So thank you, Al Gore, for doing that. So that was absolutely necessary, because the only other things we had were aerial photography, which is also very expensive to collect, and there were no cars driving around yet to
Right.
collect the street level data.
I know this was
So that was one.
2000, right? 2001.
We started in 1999
Oh,
on
okay.
that one, but the next thing I'll tell you about started a little bit earlier. So there was a graphics a video card maker, computer maker called SGI, Silicon Graphics, that was huge in the 90s. They kind of faltered because they missed the whole PC revolution and were only selling these expensive computers. The reason I got hooked up with this was because we used their computers at Disney. I got to know one of the teams from SGI, and then I worked with them again in 1999. one of the guys named Chris Tanner from SGI had worked on this. Technically, it's a long story, but it's called clip mapping at SGI. He reinvented it to run on a PC, and it was called Universal Texture. It's the thing that allows basically a petabyte of information sitting on a server to be running on your PC at 60 frames per second. So he figured out a really good way to package the information and get it into the video card efficiently. I worked on the original internet streaming part of it and the UI for the application. So he invented that core technology. And Michael Jones and a few other people, Remy Arnaud, all worked together. And Brian McClendon was involved. So, but that invention was key to having a really good experience. All the other maps were really clunky. If you remember, like Terra Explorer or Terrex, a few of those, you had to sort of click left, click left, click left, and it would just sort of move over a tile at a time. And one of the innovations at Google was smooth scrolling maps, right? Google Maps was 2D, but now it could move smoothly using what they called Ajax back then. And we made a 3D version that was smooth, seamless. And
it was a
my job was
time.
It was a breakthrough at the time. Nobody else could do that level of performance. And we took that and I turned that demo into a first version of a product by putting a user interface on it, making it fun. So things like the things that people still tell me they like the way it flies from one place to another, sort of spins you into space and you come back down. That was something I worked really hard at trying to figure out how to make it feel good and fun. And it always takes 2.5 seconds to get from anywhere to anywhere, because that's our patience. We would get impatient if it took longer. But the data has to stream. One of the reasons you flip is because if you had to page all the data between here and Tokyo, it would be gigabytes of data. So we efficiently move through the database so that we don't have to stream all that data. But it also looks really cool. So there's all these really, really cool facets of this that I think are important. But maybe I'll stop there.
Okay, so that was Keyhole, which was acquired by Google, and we know it today as Google Earth. And let's see, we talked about Second Life, but you were about to tell me about another project you said that began even earlier than the 1999, or maybe I missed.
That was what I was referring to. What Chris he started. I think he left SGI around 1998 and worked in their garage to reinvent how to do the streaming, and that was how the company was founded. And then I joined 1999 till 2001, and then it was acquired in 2004 by Google. And I sometimes people say I went to Google, but I actually never went. Everyone else went to Google, but I had already left by then. So.
But it is pretty amazing to me. You've worked with Amazon, you've worked with Google in some respect with this project, and you worked with Microsoft on the very important holodeck and
HoloLens.
Yeah, thanks. And then more recently with Apple on the Vision Pro. So, you've worked with all the big tech companies. You've also started small startup companies. You've worked on things that have endured to this day. So, they're not flash in the pan type projects. And today with Reality Prime, you're kind of the go-to guy. So if some company were considering building some kind of immersive project, you might be someone they would call to get advice about how to organize that.
Yeah, I do a lot of calls with investors. When the metaverse was roaring, I was on a lot of calls saying, hold on, hold on a second. The name's not going to stick, first of all. I predicted that Meta would kind of ruin it with their approach. And I didn't think it was going to take off tomorrow because I had worked on Second Life. That's something that I should have been the number one customer for Second Life, right? And even though Second Life, to their credit, makes more money per person than Facebook does with no advertising, their business model is really good. They only ever got to like 8 million people. And I think it's partly a design question of what do you do in the world and what are the activities and who else is, what are other people doing as well. But I looked at that and I learned back in the early 2000s when I worked with them, this is not for everybody yet. There's a certain kind of person who really has an affinity for this, but it's not going to be mainstream for a long time. And I said the same thing about the metaverse. It's not ready for prime time for a lot of reasons, safety being one of them. Safety was the critical issue in Second Life, that I got griefed, other people got griefed. It's very hard to deal with that, and it's not fun. Just imagine walking around and people are mugging you and molesting you wherever you go. That's just not a good way to be. You'd leave those places pretty fast. Most people would. Anyway, so I learned that.
Oh,
I had that
and the
lesson.
solutions are cumbersome, right? The solution is to put a little 5 meter space around each person.
It doesn't even work though, because you could harass somebody simply with your posture and how you're talking to them and looking at them. So you don't have to virtually touch them anyway. But yes, the consulting company. I'm on the board of directors of a company. That's part of what I do. But the rest of my time is trying to help people figure out the future. So whatever their worries are, I'm there to either confirm their worries or reassure them about what the future might be. And the way that I do that is probably unusual for a lot of people.
Tell me about that.
So, there are a lot of prototypers out there. People who, when early in any project, you want to prototype it. They like to call this an MVP these days in startups, but that's not exactly what I do. I don't just build. I'd say Keyhole was an MVP. It was a prototype in a first version that turned into a product. But more than that, it was a sandbox for trying new ideas, right? You want to be able to iterate quickly and change things and see what works. And that's how we landed on this arc of how you fly, was trying 50 things and seeing what felt the best. But there's another kind of prototyping, which is the kind where you want to prototype things that you can't do yet, that you want to prototype the future, not just the upcoming product.
Way to visualize, and that's more of
that
hasn't been built, but you want to
Exactly. So that's what I did at Microsoft. That's essentially what I did at Apple. So the reason I could say that is because my title was I was the senior manager of experience prototyping, right? So that's right there in the title. And what experience prototyping is take a small team of people, imagine the future of things that we can't actually build yet, and build the closest approximation, but only in one dimension. Build the user interface for it. So in the case of something like the Vision Pro, somebody, I can't say too much, but somebody needs to go and figure out, is eye tracking a good idea? How would that work? Let's go figure out the mechanics of eye tracking and then build a demo. So somebody needs to build that, and somebody needs to bring everybody through it. And the important part about that is actually bringing the designers and the executives and all the decision makers through it, so that they get an intuitive gut feeling of, is this a good idea or not? Is there meat on this? And once they get that idea, then they can decide to invest a lot of money in perfecting it. See, we can't perfect it as prototypers, but we can show it in a way that's good enough to suss out, is it a good idea or a bad idea? And then the company can go invest and buy companies if they need to, or build the technology. So essentially our job is storytelling up front, but confidence building about what is the right path, what is the right plan. And then the companies go and invest and build products. And then my team can come and help flesh out the details and figure out
build
what
a technical roadmap
does it need to be, and what kind of privacy, what kind of usability questions. So we're very useful at that end. But at the front end, when you don't know what the future is, it costs us 1/1000th of the price to build what we build as prototypers versus the real product. So it's a huge cost savings, and it saves you $1 billion if you don't do the thing that would be a mistake.
A great way to save a lot of money. You might waste chasing a rabbit down a hole that you're never actually going to get to. Hey, let me recap that for the audience, because I think what you just said is super important. On this show, we're really interested in methodologies of forecasting and how people visualize the future. And what you described just now conforms with a practice, a very good practice that we refer to often on this. For forecasting, really, there's two ways to do it. You can take an existing trend, you've got historical data, and you can project that trend forward. Of course, the world never works like that, because trends change and intersect, and it's a little bit hard. So we talk about a cone of possibilities or a cone of probabilities and possible future outcomes. But there's another way to do it. The other way to do it is to posit a scenario. And you pick a point in the future and you say, okay, at that time, assuming the following things are true, then this sort of experience might be possible. And people get curious and say, well, what's that look like? Or what would that feel like? And that's the questions that you answer. Those are the questions that you answer. You say, okay, let me develop a prototype that illustrates that in a way that's very tangible, so people can really understand what they would look like. You might use, maybe fakery. You might have to do a little bit of
cheating is okay.
Because the job isn't to build the thing. The job is to say, like, do we even want to build this thing, and answer that question first before the resources go into it. But the great advantage of doing that kind of scenario planning, where you posit a scenario, you kind of depict it very vividly, like you make that story as real as you possibly can, even if it's fiction, is that you can then work your way back and say, okay, what are the things that must be true? And they're almost like a ladder. Like there's a series of steps. Like it's like, well, this must be true. And to make that possible, another thing has to be true, and another, and another, and another. And that becomes then very clearly, you can galvanize a team. It's almost like an organizing principle for a team that hasn't worked together before and say, okay, that's our goal, that's our vision, that's our North Star. And here are the steps, the requisite steps. These are the items that must be true in order for us to achieve that. And suddenly you can do a lot of things with that. You can get people organized. You can get them to have a common vision so they're all pulling in the same direction. You can also convince investors and other people that you need the support of business partners and say, this is the direction we're going in. If they like that picture, if they like that scenario, then they can support you as well. Without it, it's enormously difficult to get people to build a future because everybody has a different idea in their head. Everybody's got a different picture of what that might be. So that's an incredibly powerful unlock. And I hope the folks who are listening pay attention to that. Avi, what I want to do now is take a little break. And then when we come back from the break, I want to ask you some tough questions about the metaverse and immersive media. So hang on, folks. We are here with Avi Bar Zeev, and he is telling us all about his experience in building out the platforms for the metaverse, immersive reality, and virtual reality, and so forth. Hang on tight. After this break, we'll be right back. Hey, welcome back to The Futurists. It's Rob Tercek, and today I'm talking to Avi Bar Zeev, and he's telling me all about, with a great deal of passion, he's telling me all about his experience in spatial computing and immersive media. And during the break, we just had a lively conversation about storytelling, the need for storytelling. And Avi mentioned to me something I did not know, which is that he's got experience as a science fiction writer. As the folks who listen to the show know, we often talk to sci-fi writers because we place great value on their ability to visualize scenarios. Avi, tell me a little bit about your experience writing science fiction and then the pivot that you made.
Sure. I mean, I've always loved science fiction, and I wanted to become a writer because of the great science fiction writers that had influenced me. And I started. I wrote a book that didn't sell, but I sold some stories. But what I started to realize was, especially after reading something like Snow Crash, was you could paint a dystopian future, and there will be people who will go out and say, we should build this.
Yeah.
And so you've all heard this sort of the don't build the torment nexus line, that somebody says we should build the torment nexus just because it's in fiction. So I never wanted to be that kind of an influence on people. I'd feel really bad if people went and built something that I described. And it was awful. And so as part of my career is also learning that the thing I wanted to do 30 years ago might not work out so well. After having tried it, I learned what was bad about it and wanted to move on. So prototyping is a better way to kind of edit myself as I go and figure out, oh, that idea was stupid. Let's throw that one out. If I wrote it in the book, I'd be stuck with it, right? It'd be there forever. So, but I do use science fiction a lot in the work because, a big project, you want to start with what I like to call the canonical stories. Like, what is your Bible? What are the stories that depict how people are going to use a new product? Tell those stories in writing first, because it's the easiest way, short of AI, you coming and building a holodeck that lets you, depict it visually and experientially. But writing lets you tell those stories, but that's not enough to build the product. You have to do that as a way to communicate. And then once you have the stories and you all agree on it, as you were saying before, you want everybody kind of be on the same page as what are we trying to build? It helps raise all the questions. So if you say in the story, somebody's supposed to put the device to their ear, well, what happens if they don't have an ear? Or what happens if the device is heavy? And so you have to start asking all those questions, and it lets you dig deeper and go down, as I say, double click, get down to the next level. So that's a first step in any product building. And it's a great conjunction to this idea of prototyping the things that you can't even build yet, so you can get people to actually try those experiences. So we did all of that in all these projects, and I've just learned so much about the right way to do it, the wrong way to do it.
And let me contrast that with the way, like, a lot of software products are built. You'll have a product manager come develop what they call a product requirements document, which is basically a list of things that it must do. So it's like, item 3.1.4, it must have an interface, like this, and it describes it and so on. But that's basically like if you were building a house that way, it would say it has to have a front door, and it has to have a window, and it has to have stairs inside. It doesn't really tell you what they look like or how to go about building. And then the engineers on the other side of the fence, you throw that product spec over the fence, and then the engineers tell you how they're going to build it. But there's no aesthetic concern from the engineering. They're just going to build it the way they know, or the way they think is most efficient, or with the tools and knowledge that they've got. And so what's lost in all that is, well, where's the user experience in this, right? And that often is at the end of the line where they'll go, well, yeah, you built the thing, but it's kind of clunky and it's hard to use, and it does kind of fulfill those requirements in the document. But gosh, now we have to fix the UI. what you're describing is different. It's you jump ahead and you say, actually, the most awesome experience possible would be something like this. This would really get people psyched. And everybody goes, yeah, that's an awesome thing to do. It's not just efficient because you're not wasting all those cycles building something that doesn't work that you have to fix. It's efficient in the sense that it gets people fired up to go climb that mountain, and they all know what mountain they're going to climb. It's a very clear
Yeah.
vision. All right, so given all that, you brought up the Torment Nexus. I'm thrilled that you did because it's a great gag. If folks are not familiar with it, there's a meme that floated around the web just around the time when Mark Zuckerberg had changed the name of Facebook to Meta. And the comic book, the cartoon basically said there's a sci-fi writer who creates a book called Don't Build the Torment Nexus. And then some geek in Silicon Valley goes, this is an awesome idea. Let's build the Torment Nexus. And of course, that was all code for the metaverse. And the metaverse has to be one of the most colossal fails ever in the history of technology. With great fanfare, the name of the company was changed to Meta. Facebook CEO famously said, consider us a metaverse company. Don't think of us as a social networking company. A lot of folks challenged him, said, well, what's the definition of a metaverse? Well, how should we expect it? How should we measure success? And no answers to those questions were forthcoming at the time. And I don't think they ever came because it was a colossal flop. All right, so Avi, you're an enthusiast. Tell me what went wrong and what should they have done differently to make the metaverse a success at Facebook?
First and foremost, the people at Facebook should have spent lots of time playing multiplayer games and living in those worlds. They should have spent hours and hours in Second Life personally. That's the future that they were saying we all wanted. They needed to experience it to see what doesn't work about those futures.
It's kind of
and I bet
anarchic.
you none of them did.
Yes.
Yeah, like they had a vision of what it could be, and this goes, I think, to a fundamental flaw of, of maybe, I never worked there, but I get the sense from how they iterate in public that this is the way things go, and it sort of stems from the move fast and break things, which is the opposite of the way I do things, which is they just say, let's build it and see what happens. Let's build the real product, subject 1 million users to it or 1 billion users to it, and then change it and iterate. And that's a recipe for failure in my book. You're going to always stumble into the things that were easily avoidable had you done this kind of prototyping and figured out how people are going to really feel when they do these things. So the fundamental problem with the metaverse, to answer your question, is there's a total lack of safety. What we've done is we've given people wizard-like powers, god-like powers to be in a virtual world, to
create a world and modify the world,
right? But the flip side of that is the equivalent of road rage or exploitation or child porn. I mean, all the bad things you can do when you're superpowered, right, become really hard. And we haven't evolved, collectively, the enlightenment, the moral and ethical set of values to deal with those powers yet, right? Mm-hmm. The whole, with great power comes great responsibilities, Uncle Ben line, but it's we're not ready as a species yet to kind of have that amount of power, and we've proven that we can't handle it.
And let me offer this.
Like
let me build on that with this kind of observation. Facebook is a company that has failed signally to solve that problem in their core product, right? Like, so that problem of the social misbehavior and social abuse and so forth, all the bad behaviors that we see in social media, those are amplified when you get into an immersive space where people are embodied and they can move around because they can do all the bad behaviors from social feeds, and also they can do the bad behaviors that you might do in the real world. And we saw that, there were virtual rapes. And so it was just absolutely appalling. That's a big problem. But tell me this, there's a second issue. One of the things I notice is whenever we see examples, promotional images for virtual reality headsets, whether the MetaQuest or any other virtual reality headset, they often show a person who's bald or has very short hair. And the reason they do that, speaking as a person who has longer hair, is because the headset's no fun if you have long hair. And if you're somebody with a hairstyle, the last thing you want to do is put a bucket over your head. But I would say in general, for people, putting a computer in front of their face, literally pulling a bucket over your head, is not such a pleasant experience. You feel vulnerable in the world that you're in. You're still in a space, unless you're in your privacy or your home. But even there, you might crash into the coffee table if you're moving around. So there's an element of personal risk in the physical world. And then there's also this virtual social risk that we've just been talking about. And so it seems like an unsafe space. Did I get that right? Or is there something off?
Absolutely right. Yeah. So you've ruled out a large percentage of the population by having anything that has a head strap on it, first and foremost. And we have done demos of things like that and had people say, "I'm not putting that on my head." And we're like, okay, we understand, because somebody just paid money to have their hair done. They're not going to go mess that up with this, and it may just not even be comfortable with people with certain kinds of hair or styles that might be fluffier in many ways, that the head strap just might not even fit well. And I know people who that's the way they got into the field, was they redesigned that for their own makeup, their own hairstyles and everything. They said,
Yeah,
okay,
reference point of one person. Yeah, that's a
but
dangerous way to design.
but ultimately, you're absolutely right. I always felt, even from 1992, that head-mounted displays were not the ultimate answer. It in some ways is the better answer than other alternatives right now, but it's not a good answer. And I was always more interested in something that felt more like a real holodeck, which was more like a room that you go into where the stuff's all virtual. And that's what we built in my first startup. That failed demo that we built was a projected environment that you don't wear anything. You just wear your clothes, walk into a room, and everything is on the walls. And that's sometimes called the cave, or there's other names for it. And one of my colleagues, Carolina Cruzniera, was the inventor of that. And it's a really good approach. And universities have these, but it's not ready for prime time in terms of your home. You need a special room in your house for it. So it's just not convenient, even though it's much more comfortable.
It could
Ultimately, we'll
work
figure this
for theme
out.
parks. It could work for like an urban theme park in an
We
abandoned
did
shopping.
Disney. We built these at Disney, and they've used them for sure. At least not a fully enclosed one, but partially
Mm-hmm.
curved screens and everything. So, and you see it now in Hollywood with these LED stages
Mm-hmm.
that are the preferred way now to shoot special effects, because the director and the actors and the crew can all see everything at once. It's not one person, and you
Right. The
couldn't put a
actor
head
can
mounted
react to the
display up.
dragon instead of a stick,
Exactly,
or something on the green
exactly.
screen.
So
Yes.
that's the future. But what we're doing is we're shrinking it down. Even glasses, though, like even if I had AR glasses that were this light, I
Mm.
don't want to wear these. I wear them because they'd be out of focus if I didn't wear them, right? I used to have perfect vision, and now I don't. And it happens as you get older. And for anyone who still has perfect vision, I hope you hold on to it as long as you can. But ultimately, everyone winds up needing glasses. And the even going down to contact lenses, now you have to ask the question of, do I really want contact lenses? I wouldn't wear contact lenses if I didn't have to either.
Yeah.
So the benefit has to really outweigh the pain.
Yeah.
But
You're
you've
asking someone to
acknowledged
put
in
a thing
saying
in
that
their
there's,
eye, like put a computer in your eye. That's a big ask, right? But most
yeah,
people don't want to touch their eyeball. When you learn to use contact lenses, you have to actually practice touching your eye because the
it's not
reflex.
easy.
Yeah, you have
Exactly.
to surmount that reflex.
And then people say brain interfaces, but that's also invasive. Nobody has a way to give you a brain interface that doesn't require implanting
Yeah,
electrodes into your
drilling a
brain.
hole in your skull,
So
to
you're
play a
dealing
video
with a
game.
bunch. Exactly, we're dealing with a bunch of imperfect choices, and we're trying to find the best trade-off of value for a purpose. And so, for for the field of VR, let's just take that by with the metaverse is usually the VR side of things. I like to distinguish that. I like to not call AR the metaverse; it's something else. But the metaverse is usually depicted as a place that we might go that's
Mhm.
not necessarily the real world, to interact with other people. And it's a big, massive multiplayer game, essentially, but maybe with stuff to do, and maybe we work there. It's not practical, A, because the devices aren't ready yet for everybody, but it's also not practical because we all spend 90% of our day immersed in the real world, talking to other people, interacting with them, doing things in the real world. We might, if we're lucky, we'll like get 10% of our day for entertainment and relaxation and doing things that are not work or social. And that's when we get to escape and play our video games. We get to watch movies. We get to do sports. We get to do all these other. Well, sports is back in the outdoor thing usually, but the 90% of our day is the core of what I try to focus on, not the 10%. So I worked with people who've done games. Second Life was very adjacent to the games community, but I've never really been a game developer. I'm a game player, but it was because I want to focus on the 90%. I want to focus on communication. How do we do this? We're on a video call. How would we make it so you and I feel like we're in the same room having a conversation face to face over coffee. We both
Mhm.
have our coffee. We just feel like one of us just feels like we came to the other person's house or office. And how do we make that feel real? So I've been motivated by that.
Just to be clear about that, so we're in two totally different cities, and
Yeah,
we have microphones and computers and screens that we're looking at. It's pretty good, right? It feels pretty good as a conversation. It's sort of like a telephone call with a video, and it works
yeah.
reasonably well. So I would say Zoom is good enough technology to create that feeling of real-time connection and conviviality. Where candidly, I don't know if any VR headset ever achieved that level of like connect, and I emphasize that because that was going to be the key differentiator for Facebook's metaverse. The vision there for Horizon was it was all about the social connection, the ability to connect with other people, the ability to communicate with other people. Right now we're communicating in so many ways with our eyes, our facial expressions, my hand gestures, because I talk with my hands, our voice, our
Yeah, me too.
inflection, and so forth. All of that is erased when you go into an immersive environment. And now you have to start from scratch and rebuild it all. And I don't think they got anywhere near enough. I mean, the cartoon avatars with no legs, that felt
With no legs.
terrible.
Yeah. The more important than no legs is you need to be grounded. You need a shadow. You need something which connects you to the ground. Otherwise, you don't even feel real. And just making up legs might work for other people, but if you see your own legs and they don't match what you're doing, it breaks the illusion as well. So the problem with VR is everything you do wrong makes it bad, makes it suck. It's very hard to do everything right. And so every little mistake adds up and it breaks the illusion, takes you out of it.
Yeah.
So I would suggest, even though some people have been critical about aspects of the Apple Vision Pro, try co-presence in the Apple Vision Pro. You get the eye contact right. The faces are close, so still a little bit on the uncanny side, but the closest that I've seen, because it gets the muscles right and gets the facial expressions right. So when people smile, it looks like them. The worst thing you could do is get 99% of the way and then think the other person's on drugs because they're not perfect. There's something wrong with them. And you're like, what's wrong with
But this is often called the
are you
uncanny valley. Like it's the problem with
exactly.
computer graphic renderings of human faces is that they get close enough to be almost right, but they're a little bit weird.
Yeah.
It's like John Sargent said when they asked him the painter in the 19th century, they asked him to describe what's a portrait, and he said a portrait is a representation of another person where there's a problem with the mouth. Because it's so
It's
hard to
true.
do mouths. I paint portraits and it's so hard to do the mouth and nose right. You get so
Yeah.
close, but there's just one little
Every
detail or
little
angle
thing
off.
that's wrong.
And it
So
really
I don't
it
even call it
immediately
the
ejects you from the illusion. Like people
absolutely.
get that at an instant. It's one of the things that the motion picture companies get very, very well, right? They'll spend an enormous amount, and by that I mean millions of dollars, to perfect a single scene or a single shot or sequence so that you avoid the uncanny valley that would cause you to hit the eject button from the illusion. Because they're all about preserving that illusion and maintaining the suspension of disbelief. The minute people sense, even on an uncanny level or on an instinctual level, that there's something off about the scene, they're out of there. They're not going to stick. You lost them for good. Okay,
Yeah.
so we've been beaten up on Meta. I mean, look, on the one hand, I have to say, more power to Mark Zuckerberg. The guy is sitting on a geyser of cash and directed some $50 billion or more in the direction of immersive media, and in that
Probably
respect,
100.
accelerated the growth of the industry and the progress. And to this day, the MetaQuest headset is by far the best consumer product in the category. So he has achieved that. I don't want to bash on the guy, although that amount of money, if he had just invested in immersive games, I think he would have had one of the most successful game companies in the world. And it's like, why did you miss that great opportunity? Games are such a great way to develop an intuitive interface that doesn't require a book or a tutorial, right? People get into games and they'll learn how to play the game themselves. They'll teach each other how to play the game. Okay, so we've been bashing on Mark. We've been bashed on the metaverse as a concept. The distinction you're making, though, is that there's really two different things we're talking about. One is a virtual world that you go into that has to fully be rendered with computers, and where you have to wear some sort of headset because you're now looking at that world, almost like you're putting yourself in that world. But the other
Mhm.
one is the real world that we live in, this world, the one that we're in every day. And here you can develop another kind of screen or display, or maybe it's projected on top of that real world. So there, the data is represented as a layer superimposed on the real world. And of course, that's difficult to do too, right? That's one of the challenges Magic Leap had is gosh, the sun is really bright and it's really hard to develop a display that can defeat the sun, right? So
Mhm.
there are immense challenges here. But I think what you're describing for our audience, I just want to make sure this distinction is accurate, is that there's really two topics here. We talked about mixed reality, but in one case, it's an immersive world that you go into, it's fully rendered, and you have to blind yourself. You have to put on a headset, put a bucket on your head to get into that world. Alternatively, I want to stay in this world. I don't want to blind myself. So there, I might wear some sort of lens on my face or have some sort of projector, but I'm really in the world, the one that I can feel where the physics are normal. Did I get that distinction correct?
Yeah, exactly. But it's what people naturally get confused. There's things in the middle, like the Apple Vision Pro
Hmm.
is in many ways an augmented reality device because it lets you see the real world and lets you see your own body and tries to put virtual things in the world in such a way that they're locked. So if I put a virtual clock on my desk, it stays exactly in that position. And the tracking is so good that it doesn't drift at all and it looks real and the lighting is right. And so that we used to call augmented reality, but it's being done with an opaque headset that gives you cameras to let you see the world as opposed to seeing the photons naturally through a piece of glass. So augmented reality, what we call optical see-through, is when the photons are hitting your eyes and we add light through something called a waveguide, doesn't matter. But that's one of the ways of doing it. And we provide all this virtual imagery to your eyes. That means you're 100% in the real world. You're not going to get sick typically because unless you already get sick in the real world or go on a boat or something, you're not going to get sick because we're not changing your world. We're not providing a substitute world. Whereas virtual reality was always about providing a substitute. Mixed reality is kind of in the middle. It's a little of this, a little of that. And so the Apple Vision Pro could be called a mixed reality device because it's opaque but giving you a view of the world. But ultimate augmented reality is always about something like we said, the glasses or the contact lenses that just add light. Magic Leap, as you mentioned, did something which I tried to do at Microsoft as well for the HoloLens, which was provide opacity so that you have to be able to block light as well as adding light, because otherwise you have to add so much light to compete with the sun that you're just going to hurt
There's
somebody with
no
all this
display that
light.
can do that. Yeah, there's no the power.
There's lasers that can do that, but now you're dealing with shining lasers in people's eyes and there's safety issues. So some of the versions of these devices do use lasers and they have a lot of, you know, of very careful engineering to make sure that those things the laser can never stay at one spot on your retina
Yeah.
or else it'll burn a hole. So it has to always be moving. So it only spends a little time. And
Yeah.
it just, you don't want to mess with, you don't want to make a mistake.
Yeah, you're basically saying, trust me. Your engineers are saying, trust me, we'll move the laser fast enough that we won't scar your retina.
Exactly. So they can prove that it's safe, but I wouldn't try it until it was proven. That's one of the kinds of prototypes that I would be super careful about trying on in the lab.
I'd prototype that before you build it. Okay, let me ask you one more question or give you one more concept here. A few years back, I had a chance to talk to Marshall Cohen, who famously was the head of marketing at MTV when they created the I Want My MTV campaign, which is incredibly successful. That was back in the 80s. And then he and Bob Pittman went over to AOL and grew that to a global powerhouse. And at one point, they were stuffing AOL discs in every magazine and publication. And you may recall, those who were around in the 1990s, that we were using them as coffee cup coasters because there were so many AOL discs. We felt like the entire landfill was being filled with these things. And he had a really interesting philosophy. I asked him about that. And he said, look, he said, we were signing up users so fast that we could afford to do that. And we would frankly do that until, if we could make 5 cents on that person by putting a disc in their Time magazine, we were going to keep doing that as long as we keep. So their vision, like they had a very clear metric for like what to spend and how to acquire people and so forth. And I said, well, what problem are you solving there? What were you trying to do? And he said, it's a very good question. He goes, you have someone who's never been on the internet before. And you're saying, here's this thing called the internet. And they say, all right, I'm not familiar with that. And so you describe some of the things that they can do, but they're all new. So it's like, I don't really get it. So you're saying, okay, no problem. Just trust me. Go through that door there. I just want you to take a step through that door. And when you see what's on the other side of that door, you're going to love it. Trust me. And the person's like, I don't really want to go through that door. And I don't know if I can trust you. And he said, that was the marketing challenge, is you're trying to convince someone to get up and go through a door that they don't want to go through. Now, in my opinion, the metaverse, immersive media, virtual reality, spatial computing, whatever we call it, it's the same challenge. We're asking people to go through a door. And if you've never done it before, you're like, I'm not sure what's on the other side of that door. And I don't like the look of that headset. And I'm not sure I want a laser pointed in my face. And I don't want to lose touch with the real world. And I'm sure not going to blind myself. And I don't want to look like a fool in front of a bunch of people. So I have all these very rational reasons for like why I'm not interested in going through the door. And that is the single marketing challenge that I don't think anyone has surmounted yet, including Apple.
Mhm.
What's your take on that? What will it take to get people to step through that doorway into this virtual space?
No, I think you're right. And there's two Apple pieces of history that I think are relevant. One is the Macintosh, and especially the mouse with the Macintosh. So people who'd never used computers before were given a mouse, and those of us who'd been using computers for years said, "One button, that's terrible. I can't right click. I can't." But it was, I think, designed intentionally so that you can't make a mistake. You can't accidentally delete stuff off your desktop. You have to drag it into the trash intentionally. And so it's for people who are new to computers, who would be intimidated by them if they could break something. It's just like my mom used to call me up saying, I was cleaning up my computer and I deleted Windows.exe and it's not working now. I'm like, you deleted Windows. Like, you did something dramatic that you shouldn't have been able to do, and that's why it's not working. And she didn't know. So putting the mittens on in a way that keeps you safe is very important. Um, the other relevant point, I think, is people always talk about the iPhone moment. There was no moment. There was a whole series of products before the iPhone that hadn't been super successful. Of course, people refer to the Newton, but think about all the other
Yeah.
touch devices
The
that
Palm and
required
the
a
Nokia
pen or
communicator and the Ericsson
exactly.
thing. Yeah, these big
So
clunky
the
shoe
big
boxes.
breakthrough, I think, that made the iPhone possible was multi-touch, was capacitive touch that felt good. So you could have a piece of glass and it felt sexy to drag and pinch and zoom, and that was the enabling technology. But everything else had to be developed along the way too. Once that enabling technology is there that makes it easy and fun and comfortable to use, people will jump on, but not right away. The iPhone 1 wasn't a huge hit, it was millions. It wasn't until you get to the iPhone 3GS, the iPhone 4, that you see the inflection
It's true.
shoot up, where you start getting all those late adopters. And what they need to see is they need to see someone else using it. They need to see their nephew using it, and he's successful. He shows it to them, and then they're like, okay, I guess this can apply to my life. And then there's the very late adopters that only ever use it until they really have to. They'll wait and wait and wait until it's been proven, and they're like, I'm still good with my dumb phone. And then people will say, well, now you really have to have a smartphone because you need this app to control your house and this app to do this. And so there's always those waves, and the same thing will happen with VR and AR and the metaverse. There's the early adopters who are willing to put 10 pounds of weight on their head and try something, to be the first one to try it. Facebook, I think, Meta is full of lots of people like that who are willing to suffer some pain in order to get some feature that they want. There's a value trade-off that they're willing to do. And right now, if you buy the new stuff, nothing's perfect. So there's value trade-offs, but there'll be enough people out there who want to buy these to try them. And then typically the people who are Apple customers are the ones who are the later adopters. There's some eager people who stand online on day one to get the new thing, whatever it is. But I think most of the customers are the later adopters who want to see it working, and they want to see it proven, and they want that seamless user experience that doesn't yet exist for the field of XR, right, which is the umbrella term for all this stuff: AR, VR, XR, MR. I mean, they're all XR. But I think Apple made a huge inroads in that, in providing a good take on what does that operating system look like, what is the equivalent of the mouse of the future for the next wave, and that is eyes and hands. Using your body is much more natural
Mhm.
than any of the other ways we've done it. Even the wrist thing, I got to try Meta's wristband thing, and I found it to not be that intuitive, and not as natural as simply looking at something and being able to go, that's what I want, Bing, because pointing is not accurate at all. So I think the user interface, even if the Vision Pro hasn't sold many, many millions of units, it establishes a what do you call it? I guess a point in time where we say that's the beginning of the new kind of interaction model, the new kind of. And HoloLens was also a first step, but that I wanted it to have eye tracking. It didn't have it until V2, and I was gone by then, and the eye tracking wasn't even that good in V2. So I think the key is you got to get these things right. You've got to get them to be natural and intuitive. It doesn't mean that everything is right or perfect about the Vision Pro, but that's one of the best things. The co-presence is really good. And the user interaction is amazing. And it just says this is what the future is going to be.
Right
Right?
on. So
Even
it's
if it's not for
incremental
everybody.
progress. And for
Yeah.
those who are listening, they have to understand these are technological marvels that are being built. Both the most recent Facebook headsets, the MetaQuest headsets, and the Apple Vision Pro. There is an enormous amount of technical progress packed into a very small package there. They're incredible. They're exquisite. However, they don't quite hit the mark, right? So they're directionally going in the right direction, but they don't quite deliver. Now, you mentioned the smartphone a moment ago, and just for context there, I want folks to realize that we had non-digital mobile phones for 15 years before there was any kind of internet or any kind of digital mobile phone. And then from the advent of the digital phone in the 1990s, it took a further 15 years before we got a smartphone that really met the spec, that really, what we would consider a modern smartphone. There were dozens of prototypes along the way, but the ones that really caught the public interest didn't really arrive until 2007. And as you point out, until there was an app store in 2008, those didn't even garner huge amounts of fans or usage. And it wasn't really until the advent of 4G networks, mobile networks, around 2014 worldwide, that they really took off. And that's a 30-year process before we got to what we now consider the smartphone boom and the kind of world that we're in. And so just to put it in perspective, now you've been working in this space for about 30 years yourself. So sorry, this is a really mean trick that I'm doing, but how much longer do we have to wait for the sun to rise into space before I get on an airplane and when I walk down the aisle to use the restroom, I see half the people on the airplane have some sort of headset on and they're enjoying some sort of immersive media while they fly? When do you think
The,
that
the
moment in time will happen?
the joke answer is 3 to 5 years. I just always say three to
Always.
five years,
Yes.
but it's never been 3 to 5 years. And this goes back to something we were talking about earlier. And I think this is a very, very rare skill. It's something I try to hone. Nobody's great at perfect at this, but it's important. Is people know the set of problems in front of them. They're like, I need to solve A, B, and C to ship this product. I like to think about D, E, and F, and I like to go all the way to X, Y, and Z if I can. And I like to do that whole set of progressions out into the future because I'll learn what are we going to need to get to X, Y, and Z. And we need to start those things 3 to 5 years early because they're going to take 3 to 5 years to build. I think one of the reasons I think that Meta stumbles is because even though they have a really great R&D division with people who do think like this, the company as a whole thinks in terms of what do I need to do next? One step at a time, which is very pragmatic, very practical, but it means you're going to keep running into problems. Every time you build something, you're going to find the problems. And if you don't employ people who are doing that kind of thinking of going out to the next thing, you're gonna always be surprised by what goes wrong, or not care. In some cases, I think, because you're successful enough that it doesn't matter. You can just stumble through it, and it's okay because you're just big enough. Um, but I think the really smart ones will be figuring out the next thing and aiming for those ahead of time so that they hit the mark at the right spot. One of the people who's really great at this is Ray Kurzweil, who looks at that exponential
Yeah.
technology curve, and he knows I can work on this product today, and it's probably doable in 3 years, but there's no market for it, and the tech is too expensive. So I'm going to wait and do that in 10 years because that's where the curve hits the right place. And it is an exponential. To try to answer your question, we tend to overestimate what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years and think everything is going to get solved, but then underestimate that in 10 years, things are way beyond what we ever expected. Like AI is a good example of that, right? We were expecting it to kind of be on this slope, and all of a sudden it went like this. And so a lot of people were caught off guard by how quickly it gained functionality that is not that it's perfect in any way, but useful functionality. And I could talk forever about the pitfalls of current
No,
AI.
as a
But
matter of fact, I would love to have that conversation with you about the intersection between AI and immersive media and XR. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today. So, Avi, tell me, where can people learn more about your work and where can they track your progress for the next 3 to 5 years as you bring these visions to reality?
I think the easiest thing is on LinkedIn. You can follow me there. I post often to LinkedIn. I do have Medium, but I have a bunch of older articles, and I need to get back to writing more articles on LinkedIn. My website is realityprime.com. And then you can see at least how to contact me and some of the major projects though. But that also that site deserves an update as well. So
Great.
there's a bunch of things. Typically too busy to do the marketing side of the business.
Yeah, no, it's the
which I should
shoemaker's
do.
children who has no shoes. I'm totally with you on that. Okay, folks, you've been listening to my guest, Avi Bar Zeev, who's been telling us all about spatial computing and the many permutations and devices along a long journey that are going to bring that closer and closer to reality, hopefully soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us, Avi. I want to thank the folks at Provoke Media who make the show possible. I want to thank our engineer, Kevin Hirschhorn, producer, Lisbeth Severance, my partner in this business, Brett King, and all the folks at Provoke. And of course, I want to thank the fans and listeners and the people who've been giving us so much positive feedback. Thank you for that. Driving the show into the top 20 of science podcasts. We're very thrilled about that. And of course, next week, I'll be back with another person who's thinking about and shaping the future. Until then, we'll see you in the future.